Hey the people, how you doing? So, today we have quite an interesting one. It's between the iPhone 12 and the OnePlus 9 Pro. Now, it's interesting because there are gonna be a few inconsistencies that we're gonna run into. Also a few shocking results, so definitely stick around until the end because it might surprise you. That's all I can say. So, let's get started because it's probably gonna be a long one. So here we go with the front camera videos, and yeah, at this point I kind of feel like I'm repeating myself over and over because, well, truth be told, the OnePlus's selfie camera is not really all that good. I mean, just look at the field of view, that's huge on the iPhone, and on the OnePlus is basically as far as I can go, and still I'm pretty much crammed in there. And well, there's obviously the problem with the resolution not being exactly great. The details are obviously not going to be as good as 4K 30 from the iPhone there too, so yeah, it's not looking particularly great on the selfie video side of things for the OnePlus 9 Pro, but it's not all lost. The rear cameras have a very different story to tell. Alright, so let's get the video quality out of the way first. It's obviously better on the iPhone 12, better dynamic range, a lot more shadow detail, it just looks better. The field of view, as I mentioned right there, much better as well, but did you guys hear the same audio that I did? Because clearly the OnePlus 9 Pro sounded really good, like quite good. It was basically as good as the iPhone 12, and it's basically never been this crisp before, which is why I went back and just checked out the comparison I did with the S21 Ultra, and I can quite easily say that the OnePlus 9 Pro is not gonna win this battle because, yeah, having 1080p 30, that's about the limit for a selfie video. That's clearly not enough for a flagship in 2021. In 2020 it wasn't enough for the OnePlus 8 Pro. Same story here, it's also not as wide as the S21 Ultra, and we are using this kind of harsh, right? So yeah, it just wasn't this good. Now, there is one thing that I can say, the OnePlus 9 Pro might have better mic quality when in landscape compared to portrait, which is what I used in the previous comparisons. Now, I'm not sure if that is the reason and it wasn't an update or anything like that, so something to keep in mind. But you know what, if we can get better mic quality out of the OnePlus 9 Pro, I'll take it. Now for 4K 30 with the rear cameras, well, this is the region where the OnePlus 9 Pro is quite good at. Now, there are the signature differences here. Basically, the OnePlus 9 Pro has really high contrast in certain cases, like right here. It can lead to some crushed shadows sometimes, and other times, maybe the iPhone looks a little bit flat, so it's gonna be a balancing act in a manner of speaking. As for colors, well, both are very accurate, but the iPhone does look a little bit more flat. Granted, that does look a little bit more natural as well, but I gotta say, the OnePlus 9 Pro with the extra vibrance, in numerous cases, I just like it so much more compared to the iPhone. It's obviously gonna depend on personal preference, but yeah, I'm a huge fan of how vibrant everything looks on the OnePlus 9 Pro. It really pops out right there. And as you can see, the iPhone can sometimes completely blow out highlights as well. It happens sometimes, not always though. Now for 4K 60, well, this is one interesting thing that I found. You cannot actually zoom in from the ultrawide to the main camera on the iPhone. You can do it on the OnePlus 9 Pro. It's a weird limitation, I'm not exactly sure why it even exists, but nonetheless, I do think that stabilization is one place where the iPhone is really good at, especially with the main camera. On the ultrawide, it wasn't really much of a difference. As for dynamic range, it's not really all that different. Yes, the OnePlus can crush the shadows at times, that's also because it has higher contrast, and the vibrance is also higher on the OnePlus 9 Pro. I gotta say, the OnePlus 9 Pro's ultrawide is really detailed compared to the iPhone. I'll get into the ultrawide details soon enough. Now we also have 8K capabilities on the OnePlus 9 Pro. The iPhone obviously has nothing as such. So here you're obviously gonna lose out on dynamic range on the OnePlus 9 Pro, there's no doubt about it. You also lose out on a little bit of stabilization, especially with the main camera, but other than that, man, you'll see soon enough for yourself just how detailed 8K can look, and I would say at this point it's kind of worth the trade-off in slight stabilization and dynamic range depending on the subject you're shooting to actually use 8K instead of 4K. But of course, that is not all that the OnePlus 9 Pro has up its sleeves. It can do 8K with the ultrawide, and it is the most glorious looking 8K video that I've seen from any ultrawide camera so far, because it's 8K, quite simply. it's amazing, you know. And the fact that you can get the ultra wide stabilization with 8K, that's really something else. Of course, it's not as detailed as a main camera's 8K, but you know, it's still amazing to me. Now we also have ultra stable mode on the OnePlus 9 Pro. You're looking at the 1080p version, and you can also have 4K ultra stable, although the stabilization isn't quite as good. And in this case, I do feel like the OnePlus 9 Pro is better with stabilization, but video quality is gonna be sacrificed, that's obvious. So yeah, you're gonna have to choose exactly which kind of stabilization you want and whether or not you want ultra stable at all, given the subjects you're going to shoot. But nonetheless, let us move on indoors, and here, this is one of our signature backlit conditions, and as you can see, I'm actually liking the OnePlus 9 Pro here. It has higher contrast and a lot more vibrance. Granted, that does look a little unnatural, especially with the blue in the wall in the background, but the higher contrast and the higher details that you can see here it's really amazing on the OnePlus 9 Pro. I'm a huge fan of how detailed the OnePlus 9 Pro can be in numerous situations. Although focusing, it's a little hit or miss on the OnePlus 9 Pro, at least compared to the iPhone. The iPhone obviously has basically some of the most impeccable focusing out there. The OnePlus is a little slow and sometimes can also be inaccurate, so do keep that in mind. Now for the ultra-wide camera, well, it's basically a similar story, but I do think the OnePlus 9 Pro is kind of crushing the shadows a bit too much. The iPhone looks a lot better with exposure, but that's about it, because I prefer the extra vibrance, and the higher contrast does help out a lot with the details and everything. It just looks so much more crisp on the OnePlus 9 Pro. Darker, understandably much darker, but also so much more crisp. And in this case, I actually like the focusing speed on the OnePlus 9 Pro. In certain cases when I'm moving back and forth, the OnePlus 9 Pro is actually doing a better job in maintaining focus in Valentine. So yeah, it seems in this kind of harsh condition, I'm once again gonna pick the OnePlus 9 Pro here, even though it is not as bright as the iPhone. Now let's get low light out of the way. Basically, the OnePlus 9 Pro is once again darker and it has high contrast, but it's just way cleaner, and it's also got a lot more detail. Like it's really noticeable. We'll get to the details test soon enough. You do not want to miss that out, so definitely stay tuned. Basically, in this case, I would say the iPhone is brighter in the shadows, but it's really not that good. It's basically not nearly as clean as the OnePlus 9 Pro. And as for the backlight, well, it's at its lowest brightness setting, so it's basically not exactly imparting much light at all. On the ultra-wide cameras, well, here's where the iPhone really falls apart. You can see it's filled with noise and grain. It just doesn't look good. On the OnePlus 9 Pro, once again, higher contrast, darker shadows, but you know, it's actually good because if it crushes shadows, you won't be seeing any of the noise there. The only problem I see is that for some odd reason, the OnePlus would not focus on Valentine no matter how much I moved around. So I'm not sure why that exactly happened, but when it does get to focus, it's actually quite a bit more detailed compared to the iPhone. It's not even a comparison at this point. Now for a final low light video, this is night mode video, or nightscape video I believe it's called, on the OnePlus 9 Pro. It's pretty good. I mean, it does reduce noise like a lot. It's almost getting artifacted around the edges, like even Valentine has some haloing going on, but it's still pretty good for a night mode video. It's very bright and a little bit too vibrant in my opinion. I mean, it has its use cases if you want some of the cleanest looking night mode video. Well, there you go. The nightscape video is the way to go, but you're gonna lose out on certain things like details, and there's probably gonna be some artifacting depending on the lighting situation. The iPhone also has a feature that the OnePlus doesn't, so it's obviously gonna take a win by default when it comes to Dolby Vision HDR. That's something only the iPhone 12, so far as I know, can do, and it is glorious. You're looking at the SDR transcoded version, so it's not nearly as good as how it looked when I was viewing it natively on screen. Now for our details test, I did use tap to focus on our subject here, so what you're looking at is gonna be the maximum amount of detail that you're gonna see. So let's crop right in. This is a 3.5 times zoom, and well, do I even need to say it? I mean, the OnePlus 9 Pro is so much sharper, so much more detailed. You can see all the texture on that leaf, whereas basically nothing. It's completely soft on the iPhone 12. So yeah, OnePlus 9 Pro definitely has better details in 4K 30. As for the ultrawide cameras, well, this time we're going to crop in up to 400%, and I think once again the OnePlus 9 Pro is going to take a nice little win right here. It's obvious there's so much more texture in both the petals inside and the glass outside as well. Even the light reflection has so much more nuanced details there. I mean, at this point, it's a slam dunk win on the OnePlus 9 Pro. I think the only good thing about the iPhone here is that it's maybe controlling the highlights a little bit better, but you know, in a details test, it almost doesn't even come close to the OnePlus 9 Pro. And it's gonna be a similar story on 4K 60 as well. Both are gonna lose out on some amount of detail in 4K 60 compared to 4K 30, but it's a little bit more prominent, that loss in detail, on the OnePlus 9 Pro. But even so, that does nothing to bridge the gap between the iPhone 12 and OnePlus 9 Pro's details. The ultrawide camera is really like coming into its own right now, especially because it's also got 8K. Now this is with the main cameras, and as you know, 8K is meant to give you the maximum amount of detail that you could possibly get, which is why we will zoom into 500%. That's massive. And obviously the iPhone isn't gonna come even close to details because it's 4K. As you can see, it's not even a comparison at this point. So much more textures are visible on the OnePlus 9 Pro, and almost like a bonus, the OnePlus 9 Pro also has much less grain and noise, even at such a major crop. Like it's really something else. And then for the ultrawide, we once again have 8K, and I do want to say something before we zoom in. Firstly, take a look at all of that noise in the iPhone 12. I'm pretty sure even after YouTube compression you might be able to see it. It's really drastic, like the difference is quite something. Similarly, the iPhone is also controlling the highlights in the background way better compared to the OnePlus 9 Pro. The OnePlus is a little bit brighter and the white balance is more accurate, but nonetheless, that highlight control is really good on the iPhone. But that's about the only good thing about it as well, because when you zoom in, the details, man. Once again, 8K on the ultrawide is just fantastic to say the least. Like it's such a massive difference. Yes, both of them have their own fair share of noise, but just take a look at how crisp everything looks, especially like the text and everything. Man, I'm really impressed by what the OnePlus 9 Pro can achieve here. But it does leave quite a bit desiring when it comes to night mode time-lapse. Because, you know, the OnePlus 9 Pro doesn't have it, quite simply. The iPhone, on the other hand, has fantastic night mode time-lapse. It just looks incredible. Now for slow motion, this is 1080p 240, and the iPhone, for some very odd reason, did not focus on the glass. I'm not sure why. I even used tap to focus somewhere down the road. It just wouldn't do it. I'm not sure why, which is why I wanted to show off this clip. It just looks terrible because it's not in focus. I mean, even if it would have focused, I would have actually picked the OnePlus 9 Pro, because the higher contrast and everything, it just looks so very nice and crisp. Like, if you look at the glass, there is so much more definition to the details there. It's really something else on the OnePlus 9 Pro. So yeah, 1080p 240 would have been my preference for the OnePlus 9 Pro, but that's not where the OnePlus stops. We also have 4K 120, and this is the cleanest and the most detailed slow motion that I've ever taken on any smartphone so far. Quite simply because I've never used a smartphone with 4K 120 before. It's a first. I'm really impressed with OnePlus here. They have really nailed slow motion, and I think 4K 120 on the OnePlus is like right beside being able to capture 8K on the ultrawide. It's one of my favorite features on the OnePlus 9 Pro's video capability list. So there we go, that's the end of the comparison. A pretty long one, I think, but damn. There were quite a few interesting finds in there, like the fact that we can get better microphone quality when it's in landscape mode versus in portrait. Yeah, I'll be honest, I never knew that. But anyways, now you know as well. So, for the rear cameras, well, for the most part, I do think that if you really want to focus on a flatter look and the best color accuracy, I think then maybe the iPhone is gonna be better. But that's about the only good thing about it. In majority of the cases, I think the OnePlus 9 Pro was either just as good, if not quite a bit better. Like, think about it. On 4K 60, the details are far superior on the ultrawide cameras. In 4K 30, same story. The details are just so damn good, it's almost unbelievable. And it just makes me think, why exactly do people feel like iPhones are the best in video? Clearly, it's not the most detailed video that you can get out of it. Yes, you do get a flatter look, and some people might prefer that, but that's a preference-based thing. Why is it universally known, even in 2021, that the iPhone 12 series can do better video compared to every other Android flagship out there? I personally don't believe it does. Do hit me up in the comments, like this is a genuine question I'm asking. Do let me know if you know the real reason as to why iPhones are really considered the king for video. At least in my testing and comparisons, I didn't feel like it was all that better, if not, actually worse compared to the OnePlus 9 Pro. It's kind of a dilemma that I'm in, and I would really appreciate some help. But anyways, I think the OnePlus 9 Pro took a very hefty win right there. I think the only place that they really need to work on is in selfie video. But with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, do hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will be seeing you guys later. Cheers!